Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond Sundays. I'm Pastor Sochiat, and today we have some special guests. We have both Ryan and Jen Alexander. Both of you have been here individually as guests. You've hosted an episode, and now we get to have both of you here together, which is, I'm excited.
Us too.
You feeling good?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, together you both just closed out the series, Walk This Way, where we've been looking at Proverbs, right? And you closed on a wonderful topic, the way of conflict, the way of healthy conflict, right? Yeah. So I just got to ask, when co-writing together or bringing a message together as a couple, how's that look like? Is there conflict in that time together?
Never.
No.
It's funny, people will say to me, Pastor Ryan, our favorite messages of yours are when you preach with Pastor Jen.
Oh.
How am I supposed to take that? But no, I get it. But it has been a journey, for us over the years. In a way, it's like a microcosm of our relationship. Mm-hmm. Learning how to take those things that can become conflicts and see how they complement each other and bring a more complete picture. Mm-hmm. I think we have different strengths at different stages of the message development process. So learning to trust those strengths and differences. Yeah.
And honor them. I think, for the first number of years, we opposed each other a lot in marriage. And microcosm's a good word. Preaching together was that. It was this crucible opportunity to work through our marriage stuff. And often I think we did the worst when we opposed one another and have done the best. And I think now where we mostly live is in being able to honor each other's gifts and make room for them. So now it's fun, but it used to be terrible.
Yeah. It's fun to watch. It's fun. Yeah, it's fun to listen and watch and see, like even hear the journey of life that you've gone together with the topics that you bring together. It's fun to get the sense of humor you have, make jokes about each other, and really, though, also have such powerful messages in the midst of that joy and that fun, right? There's still such intentionality in what you're sharing, and like I always hear from people too, like they love when you guys preach together. I enjoy it, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we do too.
Yeah, we do too.
More than ever.
Yeah. So thanks again for being here. Ryan, you said this weekend something to the nature of the way of healthy conflict is much easier said than done, right? And that many don't choose that route. Can you guys, either of you, dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I mean, I think you did such a nice job, right? When we talked about our cycle and the moments that you name to tame and get to the point of understanding, like, this is the part that I play. And just saying how imperative it is that really the only work that can be done is to own your part. And the word, as I was praying about that this morning, the word that just kept coming to me is brave. Like, you have to be incredibly brave to be willing to honestly look at yourself. It's just frankly so much easier. And I think the journey most of us take is to blame other people, especially in the closest relationship, to have a way of being that basically is like, it's your fault I can't thrive. I would be kinder if you wouldn't, I'd be more organized, but you're the problem. It's so much easier to do that. And it requires such courage to say, no, I need to face the things and look at the things that I need to own. And it is really hard work, and it's long work. And it really is the work of self-reflection, which I think some people in our culture are big on, and others think that it's like navel gazing. Yeah. I really think it's important to remember that any self-reflection we do, any healing that we are attempting before the Holy Spirit, and any resources that we're bringing in and therapy that we're doing, is never for the end game of just myself being well. The end game is that I would be able to love well. And so that work is always worth it, but it is hard work. And I think that few are willing to undertake it. But I'm so grateful we have, because we're better people, let alone a better couple for it.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. What about when it comes to dealing with maybe someone else's conflict, right? Or we know of a conflict that's going on with some people we care about, maybe, or even just as pastors, conflict comes to our door because people are seeking help, right?
Sure.
Yeah. When it comes to handling and dealing with people's conflict, there's a Proverbs 26:17 that says, interfering with other people's arguments is like yanking at a dog's ear.
Isn't that a funny one?
That's
I
so
loved
good.
that one.
Yeah.
I was sad we didn't have time to talk about it on Sunday, so I'm glad we can.
Yeah.
What does that teach us? Like, what does that Proverbs teach us about the dangers of getting involved maybe in others' conflicts when we don't necessarily need to? Dive into that a little bit.
Well, toward the end of the message, I mentioned that there are really two extremes when it comes to like over-engaging, over-functioning, or under-functioning, or withdrawing.
Yeah.
And the extreme with over-functioning or being too aggressive or being too quick to enter into quarrels is making fights that aren't your own your own. Other people's fights your own. And there's almost like an addictive quality to that, or the drama of being engaged in other people's conflict. And I think it allows us to avoid and escape the real issues going on when we can get caught up in that drama or other people's conflict. That cycle you mentioned, the dog's ears proverb. We have a dog at home, Griffey, and he actually loves to lick my ears.
Yes, he does.
My dog too.
I know what it is.
Clean him out.
But that's such a descriptive kind of way of talking about like you're entering into a conflict that's not your own. One of the many resources we picked up along the way therapeutically is family systems theory. A guy named Murray Bowen developed this in the 1970s, and one of the concepts was triangles. That we can get pulled into triangles. Yeah. That two people by themselves are eventually going to get pulled into some kind of conflict because we're human. It's just going to happen. It's like a dyad is unstable, inherently unstable. And so, and when that happens, there's a tendency to want to pull in a third person or project that onto a third person, that anxiety that is going on between us. Well, let's put that onto Sochiat, or let's focus on Sochiat because, it's too much for us to work through or handle together. So as the third person, it's really important to resist being pulled too far into that.
Yeah.
It can be tempting and alluring, and we want to be heroes, we want to be helpful, but it's like vortex.
That savior complex too sometimes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and oftentimes we're not even aware of it.
Right.
So like we talked about in the message, like that automatic response we need to become more aware of, and that tendency to get pulled into triangles. And with triangles, we are going to be, three of us are in a relationship together, even right now. So you're the third. You got to make sure you don't get pulled too far into our conflict. And so the term that Bowen uses is being staying in contact relationally, but having enough distance emotionally. And that's a tough, fine line to walk, but really important to lean into that. And Proverbs 26:17, you don't want to yank on the dog's ears.
No. So for my dog, yanking is one thing. My dog likes being both of my dogs love their ears being rubbed on, but if you yank it, I've never tried that. Probably won't either. They're small dogs, but still. Anyway, in that, how can we discern when to step in or when to step back in conflict situations, whether others or our own, especially when maybe our own emotions or biases are involved? Like how could we discern that?
Well, I think discerning is inherently tricky. But when I was thinking about this question, I think there's a really fine line, you use that as about something else, between like healthy detachment and stonewalling. Or like Solomon talked about building walls, right? Those are different things. And I think that how you differentiate them or how I differentiate them really comes down to the motivation they're in. Like the ultimate motivation should be for the restoration or the preservation of this relationship. And so there are times, and we talked about it, when we do need to step back, to cool off. We talked about when things are too hot, that is not the time to engage in conflict. We need time sometimes to step back and do the work that we need to do in order, what's going on with me? What am I protecting? What am I afraid of? All those things take time. But the ultimate end game is the preservation of the relationship. Conversely, we can go into withholding, which is weaponizing. We can go into distancing, that's destructive, like we talked about. But that can have a self-preservation motivation. It can be a self-protective motivation. Like you talked about, Ryan, the unhealth of cutting off a relationship. It's so tempting to think that will solve it. But that is ultimately so selfish. So I think the motivation is really important. And the goal should always be to step back in order to step back in,
That's good.
To step in. And then the other verse that was just rattling around in my head all week, and we didn't have time to share it, but I think it applies here, is in Romans 12, when the author writes to be joyful in hope and patient in affliction.
That's good.
Patient in affliction.
Faithful in prayer.
Yeah, and faithful in prayer. But I think that word pairing of being patient in affliction is just such an interesting pairing, because I think when we are inside of affliction, inside of conflict, our instinct is to want to get it over. Like, this needs to be over. So if I need to yell louder or slam a door or stonewall or whatever it is to get this over with, that's when a whole lot of damage is done. But when we are patient in affliction, I mean, it's so central to our faith that it's the struggle that creates perseverance and character and all those things. And I was just thinking this morning, I was out on a walk, and I was just thinking how grateful I am that we've had 25 years of patience in our affliction, because it's allowed us to grow and to learn what love really is and to become more like Jesus. So, yeah.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Romans 12:12 is my life verse, by the way.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
I sit in it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like patient in affliction. Nobody's ever yelled at me and then I just agree with them. Like you can't argue somebody into a resolution.
Yeah, that's right.
It takes patience, and that's good.
Time.
That's good.
Yeah.
Time. Yeah. Well, we've all heard the saying, it takes two to tango. Facts.
Yeah.
But when dealing with conflict, not the two that are involved in the tango don't necessarily both maybe want to enter into a healthy resolution, right? And so what happens, or what could we, when one person is unable to approach conflict healthy, like what can we do about that? What should we do to respond to that kind of an attitude versus like forcing resolution or trying to make something happen?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's tricky. And I think there are a couple of scenarios. One is that people refuse to enter into healthy conflict resolution. And then sometimes people just can't. They're not healthy enough.
Don't have the tools.
They don't have the tools. They don't have the emotional health. And so is it a can't or a won't? I mean, I think that's something you have to discern. And you can't force, you can't control, you can't fix other people's problems for them. On Sunday I said we have to find out what those limits are, but we're not really good at figuring out where our responsibility ends and where someone else's begins. So we need other people to help with that, even with what you were talking about earlier, Jen. It's really important that we get some objective, unbiased perspective. I'm like, okay, is this a situation where the other person really isn't healthy enough or isn't willing? Have I done everything that I can possibly do? We need other people to help us discern that, but we do reach a limit at some point where we've done what we can do, and we can't. There's a saying I've gone with, like, we can't work harder on someone else's emotional health than they are willing to. And that's a boundary. We've got to set some boundaries. We can still love, but love from a distance. Or another way to think about it is, at some point you got to stop the insanity. What's insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, doing that same dance. Actually, in Proverbs 26, I guess Proverbs 26 is like the dog chapter, because there's Here, let me give you this mug.
Okay.
As a dog returns to its vomit, this is Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Right? And we talked about on Sunday the foolish nature of getting pulled into conflict. When your brain shuts down, you're not being rational and thoughtful. And so at what point have you gotten to that
Are you
insanity?
returning to your vomit?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
it's so gross, but totally
Thanks
true.
for picking up Griffey's yesterday, by the way.
What's up with dogs? We just
and then we just have to control. At that point, we just have to control and care for the one person we can ultimately control and care for, which is ourselves, and keep doing the work to be emotionally healthy.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that's part of like loving yourself.
Yeah.
In order to love your neighbor, you gotta love yourself, but like you gotta be a healthy person, right? You gotta. How do you love somebody if you're not taking care of yourself well? So that's really good. So what practical steps can we take to set it down, to like not go back to the vomit, or to set it down at the foot of the cross instead of getting entangled in like unhealthy disputes and conflict with people? What are some ways we could do that?
Along the way, I think in the last couple of years, I don't recall what stream it came from, what person it came from, but we together have taken on the term, it all belongs. That's really helpful. And the other one is, it's all for our healing. It's all for my healing. And I think that one of the things I wished I could have said in the Sunday sermon is that close relationships really are the primary place that we get to work out our salvation. You know, they're the primary place that we get to be refined. Mm-hmm. And so when troubles come, when struggles come, when conflict comes, I think in as much as we can stay curious instead of panic, and curious before the Lord. You know, I mentioned that we're going into Lent, and that's really, it can be a beautiful time to lay something down, like you said, and say, Holy Spirit, I need help with this. Would you help me with this? But I think when we can take on, like, this conflict is hard, but there is healing in it for me. Lord, you have something in it for me. Then even conflict can have gifts for us, can have growth for us. And then I was thinking about the cross this morning, and it's so basic, but it's just so beautiful and true of Christianity, that we get to enter into the co-suffering of Christ. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's no place that happens more than in relationship. It's where we learn how to lay our lives down for the sake of another. That's so much easier said than done. But it's when we really do enter into the Jesus life, is when we learn what that means to lay our lives down. And to remember that no matter how much we're being accused, no matter how much we're being misunderstood, our Savior understands that times infinity. Mm-hmm. And as much as we might need to take on the wrongs of another and die to ourselves and all of that, I mean, Jesus took on the wrongs of humanity and died for it. And so I think in that way, conflict can actually be a really beautiful opportunity to be with Jesus in a whole new way, and to take on his life and the understanding of what he's done for us in a whole new way. And so surrendering to it.
Mm. I think about that as a husband. You know, Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. You know,
right. What did he do for the church? The
sanctification, the growth, the healing that is part of that process.
And he died for the church.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah.
Preach.
Preach. Beyond Sunday.
Beyond Sunday. Thank y'all for being here. As always, I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
Because we could dive into this topic for hours. Yeah. Thank you again for being here. Yeah. And thank y'all for tuning in to another Beyond Sundays. If you haven't caught any of our other episodes, go to our YouTube, where you're here now, but go check out the other episodes. Such meaningful, powerful conversations that can help you grow to look more like Jesus. We'll see you next week.